Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Whale Nerds podcast. This is episode 119. My name is Slater, and I'm here with Adam and Caitlin.
What's up?
Hello. And we have a special guest this week. We have Dr. Matthew Savoca joining us. Matthew Savoca is a postdoctoral researcher in the Goldbogen Lab at Hopkins Marine Station at Stanford University. And he grew up in New York. He got his undergraduate degree at Cornell University, and he completed his PhD in ecology at UC Davis. He's been awarded fellowships, including one from NSF, National Science Foundation. He's given a TED Talk about marine pollution, and he is also a science communicator in addition to a marine ecologist. So welcome, Matthew. Thank you for joining us. We're so excited to have you on.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin and Slater and Adam, for the opportunity to chat with you today about some of the stuff we've been up to. And looking forward to it. It's really fun to be part of this community, and being on this podcast. I don't think you're really a marine mammal or cetacean biologist in Monterey until you've been on this podcast. So
tell Jeremy that he has to be on here then.
Good luck. But I'll let him know that I did it, and then I'll tell him that he's on deck. So
we've gotten two from the lab so far.
Right. No, we have other good folks in the lab that I think would be really, really great guests as well. I see you've done Dave Cade, and we'll definitely talk about the stuff that he's done, in relation to the research that I've worked on. But there are other folks in the lab who I think would make for quite good interviews for you all as well.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are working on cool stuff over there, especially whale stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you grew up on the East Coast, right?
Yep.
So how did you kind of like get interested in biology or marine biology? Like, how did that kind of come to be?
So how I got into marine biology is somewhat a convoluted story. I'll try to tell somewhere between the abridged and unabridged versions. So I grew up in Staten Island, New York, which is the forgotten borough of New York City. And when I grew up there, I guess I'd always been interested in animals and nature and the environment and that kind of thing. I think a lot of kids are, but the difference between me and most kids, I guess, that I grew up with who, we liked animals, traded animal facts, and, read National Geographic or zoo books or whatever it is that I just always kind of continued learning and loving that stuff. And I think a lot of other people that I grew up with just eventually were like, well, I got to go get a job and do something. And you're not going to get a job, being a wildlife lover. And I think for me, it's hard for me to work on something I don't care about. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I considered other, career paths, I'm talking like completely different fields, right? I just could never see myself doing it and putting out good work if I didn't care about what I was doing and I didn't think it was important. So, I mean, my earliest memory about like what I want to be when I grew up was in second grade or something like this. And as I think is probably typical, I said, I want to be an accountant because that's what my dad was. And then I actually started to talk with him about his job in finance. And I remember thinking like, God, that sounds terrible. Who wants to do that? And then by my fifth grade yearbook, why do we had to have our, dream job in a fifth grade yearbook? I don't know. But anyway, at that point, it was wildlife photographer. So I was already kind of like on that track by my fifth grade yearbook. But in terms of marine stuff, I think, one of the things that might be surprising for folks is that I didn't, grow up super engaged with the ocean beyond just like loving the natural world and all kinds of animals and ecosystems. I wasn't a scuba diver or a surfer or anything like this. Mm-hmm. I loved birds, actually. So I was initially a bird nerd. I know I'm on the Whale Nerd podcast now, but initially I was a bird nerd. And and that was really my gateway into the natural world and thinking about how ecosystems work and what animals can tell us about the state of the ecosystem. And so then in undergrad, I worked on my first research projects, bird related. And one of those projects was on gulls, actually, at the Shoals Marine Lab, which is Cornell and University of New Hampshire's jointly owned and operated marine station off the coast of Maine. And when I was there, I remember just kind of falling in love with seabirds, actually, in particular, because they could tell us all about the state of the ocean. They went out there and sampled the ocean for us and told us that, about the health of the ocean. And they had really fascinating biologies and life histories. And I became really interested in seabirds. And so then I went to grad school and focused on seabirds. And so I didn't even start working with whales until I worked with Jeremy starting officially in 2018. So I'm fairly new as far as a professional marine mammologist, but I've been a whale nerd for quite some time.
There you go. New convert.
Yeah.
Are you missing the birds?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the great thing about birds is that they're everywhere. I mean, and you don't have to try too hard to photograph birds, enjoy birds. And I think that's why they're such a great gateway for so many people into thinking about the environment and nature and those connections, because unlike, frankly, whales or any other type of animal that are, that you're really into, you don't have to go and dedicate a big trip and allocate money and resources and time to go see birds. You can just look out your window in most cases and see some type of birds that are around, hang up a bird feeder, something like that, go to your local park. And I think that's the power of birds, actually. So I would say, I mean, I miss the birds in the sense that, I've been deserted by the hardcore ornithology types that are like, you study birds and that's it. And for me, it's just kind of like, what animals do we need to know more about? Do we need to answer good conservation questions on? Can we get people to rally behind? And so, whales were kind of a natural other one as well. But, I miss the birds somewhat, but I still get to have them in my life. So that's pretty important to me.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you went to like one of those places where it's like bird central, like Cornell's pretty renowned in the bird world. So.
Yeah, Cornell is pretty birdy, and that's one of the reasons why I went there. Actually, I was really into birds and working with birds, and studying birds and their ecology. That was really excited to do that, even in undergrad, definitely. Cool. They also study whales there. They have a big whale acoustics program there, and bioacoustics generally, which of course birds, elephants, but also whales. So. But in undergrad, I didn't do any work with whales, but always really liked them.
Nice. Well, I mean, whales and birds associate together a lot. So
yeah, I'm one of the people that on the whale watches or even on field work, there'll be like some interesting shearwater or storm petrel, and I'm just like, wait, we got to go look at that, or like, what is
that guy? You're that guy.
Or like, we'll be out doing field work or something like this, and it's like, if we see the now locally famous short-tailed albatross or short-tailed albatrosses. It's like, oh, no, we have to like go and see this thing. I should just say that I've never actually seen the short-tailed albatross, and I believe at least some of you have, right?
I think just Slater. Yeah.
I have photos of it. Yeah.
And I'm very jealous because that's as a seabirder and a bird person, that's like a holy grail bird. So that's really pretty amazing. But yeah, I'm one of those people. I'm like a whale watch. It's like, oh my God, we have to forget about this humpback. We've seen 50 humpbacks already. Who cares about this? There's a
but
You're one of those.
But what if there's killer whales hunting a gray whale? Are you gonna look at the birds, or are you gonna look at the killer whale predation going on?
Well, again, I mean, what kind of bird is it, right? There's
albatross there.
Yeah, it's black-footed albatross or.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, come on, black-footed albatross. No.
Common.
It's got to be. I thought now, if you were saying short-tailed albatross versus killer whale,
there's some storm petrels around.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go with killer whale on gray whale predation, because I think that's kind of like the equivalent of like a cheetah hunting a gazelle or a lion hunting a wildebeest in the African savannah, in terms of animal interactions. And that's really what I get excited about. But if you're talking about short-tailed albatross and those other things,
that's like king.
That's going to be really tough for me.
Yeah, that's up there.
We had a big group of birders. From where are they from, Caitlin? The UK?
Oh, yeah. Most of them are from the UK.
We had this crazy it was with a sea lion, actually, but they were just throwing it around. And these guys were not watching it because there was black-footed albatross. I don't remember what there was, but they were just, I was like, come on, look at the whale. Like,
yeah, well, You know,
But if you're a
birders are a
birder, you're a
special breed.
birder.
They are, yeah, they are particularly committed to their craft of
Yeah.
looking at,
Yes.
finding, identifying, photographing
Yes.
birds. So
Birders are a different breed for sure.
yeah,
That's okay. We need them all.
No,
Yeah.
no, no.
It's interesting. I mean, when we talked to Robin Baird a couple years ago, they had taken enough pictures of a certain kind of storm petrel in the Hawaiian Islands that they were like contributors to a paper making the bird two different species. So like even the whale people, you know, are paying attention to the birds.
yeah. I mean, you know, and you know, even back in grad school, what the first paper I wrote from my PhD, which was published in 2014, we very specifically and explicitly talked about this sort of group foraging of seabirds and whales and how they help each other out at sea, finding food and exploiting patches of food and so on. So yeah, I mean, you know, again, it's seabirds and whales are friends. They're not foes.
Yeah, it's funny, even for us, like as photographers and stuff, you know, it's like, all right, where are the birds? Like, you know, when the
Yeah.
birds are there, like you'll follow the birds around and they hit the surface of the water. You're like, oh, there's some bait there. Watch out for the lunch. You know? So
Yeah.
it's cool that you have the background of both, I guess, like the land or the air and the sea, right? And the whole ecosystem and how it plays together. It's super cool.
Yeah. That's always been interesting to me, not just one
Yeah.
species or whatever, but how the whole system works together. Definitely.
So why did you come to the West Coast for graduate school then?
Well, I wanted to try something other than the Northeast, which is the only thing I'd known. Actually, the first time I ever went to California and maybe even saw the Pacific Ocean was when I was interviewing for grad school at UC Davis. And I remember very specifically, so I was going to college in upstate New York at the time. And, you know, when they do grad school interviews, it's the winter. So in the winter in upstate New York, you know, it's probably below zero,
Miserable.
definitely below freezing, really unpleasant unless you like super cold and snow stuff, which I'm not a particular fan of.
Me neither.
And so, yeah. And so I remember coming to California, visiting UC Davis. And this was back at the time when it still rained in California in the winter, which, as we know, doesn't do
Not anymore.
Right, exactly.
Has
So
not for a long
That's
time.
normal. Yeah, that's normal.
yeah, so this was back in 2009 or early 2010.
Oh wow.
And yeah. So I remember coming out from my grad school interview and it was raining, but it was like, you know, 65 and drizzly or something like that, which to me was paradise in whatever it was, December, January, something like that, February.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember all, you know, these folks that I was talking with at Davis, professors, other grad students, whatever, they were profusely apologizing to me. Oh, we're so sorry about this weather. It's not even bad, blah, blah,
They
blah.
think it's so miserable.
And I was just like, you know, it's all about perspective. This
It totally is.
this might as well be a Caribbean island to me right now. I mean, this is absolutely perfect.
Adam was saying it was cold this morning, huh, Adam? Or was
It was cold. Well,
yesterday?
I'm used to 75 and sunny in Santa Barbara, so
I moved
Well, like, I
from
mean, it's all
Oregon,
about
so it's the
perspective,
same
right?
thing.
all about perspective.
In 2017, I came from Davis, and you know, compared to Davis, it's cold here, right? So it's all about perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you tell us a little bit about your work with marine plastic? I think you did a paper, right, on marine fish ingesting plastic in 2021.
Yeah, I guess if I had to say like the one thing that I've worked the most on, like specific topic, it's animals eating plastic, basically how plastic flows through marine food webs. And should we care about it? Why should we care about it? What effects is it having? Is it increasing or decreasing over time? Those types of questions. Can we use animals as indicators of the broader pollution of the environment and the food web? Those types of questions. And yeah, so that paper that you're talking about, basically one of the things I've been interested in recently, and I would say generally as a scientist, I think we being the scientific community broadly, not, you know, our research group or whatever, have just boatloads of data, right? We, you know, scientists are obsessed with going out and collecting and generating original data, but there's so much information and knowledge to be gained by just harvesting, mining, thinking about the data in aggregate. And so that's kind of what that paper was about, which was taking, at the time, everything published on fish eating plastic around the world and asking a couple sort of straightforward questions, which is how widespread is this? Are there any sort of predictors or determinants of plastic consumption amongst fish? So like what trophic level you're at, where you feed, geography, where you are in the world, that type of thing, to be able to ultimately predict which species might be at risk that are either undersampled or unsampled, that type of thing. And then also to see if we could detect any changes over time in terms of how much plastic fish are eating over time. And so, yeah, I mean, we didn't actually collect any original data for that study, right? But there's so much out there now. Starting around 2010, this topic just absolutely exploded. Of course, we knew about plastic in the ocean since about the 1960s, 1970s. But, you know, in about 2010 or so, this topic just completely exploded in popularity. And there's just so much, you know, data that more or less boils down to, we looked for plastic ingestion in this species and yes, we found it, or no, we didn't, or, you know, here's what they were eating, you know, just kind of this basic information that by itself is interesting and useful, but in aggregate, I would argue is even more interesting and useful. And that's kind of what that paper was about.
So like how screwed are we?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I just wrote, I'm happy to link it on your website or whatever. I just wrote an article kind of about this. And I think, you know, we don't know. And I know that people don't want
I'm
to.
afraid.
I was saying, I know people don't want scientists to say that, but, you know, I think the thing about plastic in the food web is that it can't be good, right? So it's either neutral to bad. And the question is like within that
How
part
bad?
of the spectrum,
How bad is it? Yeah.
yeah, right. And so we are kind of trying to figure that out now. And I think depending on a lot of factors, it might not be as bad as some people think, or it could be just as bad or worse. And it likely is really dependent on things that may or may not have to do even with the plastic itself. So one of the things that I was writing about recently, just published a popular article on, is that, you know, plastics are just one of a huge number of synthetic pollutants in the marine environment, not just in the marine environment, the global environment.
Right.
And people are really passionate about plastics, right? Because we know what they are. Everyone understands and has plastics as part of their daily lives. But I think what folks don't understand is that these plastics are, you know, are mixed with all these different chemicals, and all of our, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse here. I almost cursed. I'm from New York. Sorry.
Go for it.
I kind of
We
cursed.
only have a few young listeners, so one every once in a while is
I'm trying to control
bad.
myself, but the point is that, you know, this chair I'm sitting in, these clothes I'm wearing, if you're wearing makeup, if you have a child and they have baby toys, if you have food that's encased in this or that, there's all these synthetic chemicals that are incorporated in the products that we use every single day that have somewhat unknown health consequences and some known and bad health consequences that are quite problematic, and we really need to start dealing with. But the general public doesn't even understand that this is happening, I feel, right?
Yeah, like BPA-free
everything.
plastic, like that's
Right.
the one
Yeah.
thing that's like kind of common
So
knowledge.
this is right. So that's the thing, right? Is like we determine something can be harmful, right? BPA is just one example, right? And then it's like, oh, cool, BPA free. Well, guess what? There are hundreds of thousands of those types of chemicals. Not
Right.
Yeah,
just
PCBs and
oh man, I mean, I know you're naming the
just
ones.
everything.
You're
Yeah,
naming the ones
that
that
we know of. Yeah.
Yeah, you're naming the ones not only that we know of, but we know are bad and are well regulated. DDTs, PCBs,
Yeah.
PBDEs. Those are like flame retardants.
Yeah.
But then there is a world of chemicals that are in everything: plasticizers, PFAS, UV stabilizers. I mean, on and on and on and on and on. That I don't even think people realize are in things.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
it's changing all the time too as people figure out how to blend different materials.
Oh yeah, right. So the question of like how screwed are we from plastics? I think honestly, my honest thought is like maybe not as screwed as like the general public thinks we are, because there's been such hysteria about plastics. I think that could be, my statement there could be misconstrued of like, oh, scientist says we don't need to worry about plastics. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I think we're appropriately as a society concerned about plastics, but I'd like to raise the level of concern about these other things that are, related to plastics.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
For sure.
plastics are so interesting because you can apply the same things you learn for plastics to like anything else. Like I did an independent study at my community college in 2017, studying plastic abundance in a very secluded bay in Baja, and we did plankton tows and different tows in 3 different locations, and in probably the most remote place I've ever been to, there's still microplastics there, right? But then you go into a step further, right? It's like, okay, these are microplastics, or the secondary microplastics. Like, okay, if they aren't, where are they coming from? Are they coming from the town close by? Are they floating in from California and going around the Baja Peninsula? And then it's like, are they actually being ingested by other species? And it's like you have so many different avenues you can go with plastics that I think if you understand that, you can also apply that to chemicals. So I think once you start to understand the plastic issue, you can kind of relay that to really anything else, because they bring up a lot of questions.
Yeah, completely. And that's why I like to use plastics as like a Trojan horse to talk about other things.
It's a gateway topic.
Yeah, no, I think it really is. And I think the key that we've done with plastics and society, which is great, is get people passionate about this topic.
Yeah.
And I mean, man, we really need to harness that model and apply it to biodiversity loss, climate change, chemical pollution, whatever. And anyway, and I think that would really be helpful to think about, in an epistemological way, how we did that. And it might have just kind of been by accident. Like people just got excited about it. Like scientists said, hey, look at this thing that we're finding. And, people
it was a plastic straw in a turtle's nose. And
right.
It started from there, and it's one viral video that hits people a certain way.
Those pictures of those albatross chicks, the carcass on the shore, and the stomach, where the stomach used to be, is full of plastic bottle caps, lighters, all kinds of
plastic
stuff.
ocean. That's like one of my favorite documentaries on Netflix.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's stuff like that. It's Netflix working with ideas like that. I think it's super cool. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is fun though. This is why, going back to the initial thing that you mentioned, was like, in second grade, when I was like, oh, I want to be an accountant, and then I learned my dad did. I was like, and then I'm like, then I thought about like, what's my passion, right? And animals really just are my passion, right? And then thinking more deeply over time as I grew up, it's like, well, they need our help. They need an advocate. They can't vote. They can't speak for themselves, at least not in our languages. And so they deserve and require protection, and, not enough people are standing up for them. And so a lot of our decisions as a, global society obviously have impacts on these different communities, species, populations, and so on. And, someone needs to be the voice for them as well. I'm not saying I'm the only one doing this. Obviously, there are many thousands of really dedicated people that work on this, but I'm happy to be part of that, constituency for them.
Yeah, I mean, if people can make the leap when they look at these topics about like really realizing, one, there's no away, right? Like it doesn't go away. It goes somewhere on the planet. But also that like we're kind of all responsible to each other in this situation, because debris and chemicals don't care about your borders. You can't have a contained closed loop system in your country for waste. So we're all in it together. For better or worse.
Yeah. And that's the thing about like I think anything like plastics, same thing with whales or productivity in the oceans, biodiversity. Like once people start to realize that, like if you look at the system as a whole versus like, okay, plastics are really bad in this region, but like that's not affecting me. But it's like it is affecting you. It's
Right.
all one giant connected Earth, right? That's the way I look at it.
That's partly the problem, is getting people to care about things that are not happening in their area.
It's true.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like climate change is happening in all the areas.
Right. Right.
Some
And I think-
faster than others. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, what's been really powerful about what's happened in the last, I'd say like 10 or 15 years or so. And I mean, I've seen this happen in real time, as we all have, but I call this the era of like, climate change, for example, coming to our doorstep, right? So, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, well, when I visited California, California was still wet and the fires were regular, but controlled, right? And now California is parched and boiling and on fire. And you can't deny that. Even I've only been in California for 12 years. It's just like, man, this is a different California than I came to, right? And so people who've been here for 20, 30, 40, 50 years have seen even more of that change. And I mean, it's hard to deny at this point.
Yeah,
They do.
for sure.
They still
I mean,
do,
they still
yeah.
do, but you're not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. We don't have to go there, but I do see perception shifting.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even, the more, let's say, former climate deniers now might say, well, climate change is happening, but our
It's
human
not that
Yeah.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
or
right?
something
And
like
that, even that
Is a step.
is a step, right?
Yeah. Well, we can shift away from it's a good segue opportunity to shift away from your work with plastics and just the state of the world. And we really want to talk to you about the paper that came out last year, the baleen whale prey consumption based on high resolution foraging measurements. Because wow, we were so stoked when that
Like our
came
favorite
out. So
article.
yeah, Slater's like, it's my favorite scientific paper.
Nice. All right. Yeah, like to hear that. That's
so-
great.
Just kind of want to go back to like the whole start of how did you collect the data? Like, were you in the field, like that kind of side of it first before we talk about the results and like the impacts of the paper and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, the best place to start is to take even one step back of like, why did this paper happen in the first place? And,
Yeah.
and the reason is, going back to what we were just talking about, is I was interested in kind of quantifying to the extent possible, or creating a quantitative prediction, really, to the extent possible, of how much plastic whales are eating, large filter feeding whales, right? And there's two routes in which large filter feeding whales ingest microplastics. That's through the water, because they filter the water, obviously, and through their prey, right?
Food, yeah.
And what I found after, and I remember thinking like, oh, okay, no one's applied this to plastic specifically, but surely we have numbers on these two sort of critical items in terms of their life history of whales, the big baleen whales, how much water they're filtering, how much prey they're eating. And what I found after doing some digging was that we don't really have numbers based on field data for living baleen whales for either of those things.
Yeah.
And so then started a 2 or 3 year kind of diversion of like, well, to do this thing I want to initially do, we need to get these get better estimates for how much food these whales are eating. So yeah, that's kind of how that started. And I was involved in some of that field work for the paper that we're talking about that came out last year, but most of that work had been conducted before I got to the lab. And so what I was primarily tasked with doing was to, again, kind of like with the fish plastic meta-analysis that we were talking about earlier, was synthesizing a huge amount of data from all these different tag deployments that a bunch of different collaborating lab groups, for which Jeremy Goldbogen's group is one of the main ones, has been putting out all these tags on whales all over the world for, well, over 10 years now. And more recently been collecting measurements of the prey density in these patches that we know whales were feeding on, and measuring whales with drones. And so combining these metrics, we're able to actually use field data from living animals to, we think, better estimate how much food these whales are eating on a day in which they're eating, which these whales don't eat every day. So that's an important point as well.
Yeah.
So how shocked were you guys by the results? Because it totally blew what we thought we do about how much they eat, like
I
out
have
of the
to
water.
go back and edit like 100 captions of whale facts that I've said over the years.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think all the old estimates sort of didn't. And we could do a whole episode on this, but quite frankly, that's not the most exciting thing to talk about in a podcast. But the old estimates, I think, didn't factor in the really dynamic life and environment that these whales live in, right? So essentially, like the old estimates, of which there were several, I mean, primarily they were metabolic estimates, right? So if we know a dolphin needs to eat this much, if we scale that up to a humpback or blue whale, then they should eat this much. And, if we kind of think about that across an average of a feeding season or an average of a year, it works out to this, right? But as we know, people who, know and understand the way baleen whales live, for the most part, they aren't eating every day, and they aren't even eating every month. And even within the feeding season, when they're up in Monterey, right, they're eating like crazy most of the time, or a lot of the time, but they go for days or weeks, even within the feeding season, without eating. So what that means, and this is, I think, generally kind of the bigger picture here, is like, on a day when, the conditions are good, they are really highly adapted and evolved to stuff in as much as they can. And some of those numbers are really, really incredible, right? I mean, I remember kind of early on, I think, this is maybe not uncommon when you find a surprising result. Like kind of early on, when you start to look at the data, it's not like finalized yet, but you can kind of see early on that the top ends, especially, of some of these estimates are wild, right? I mean, how often is that happening in reality is hard to say, because again, it's biased when we're taking this data, right? Like Jeremy's group, and these other groups that we work with, we study whales when they are feeding, right? So what that means is it's much harder to extrapolate to a year, to a season, to a month. I mean, we do it, but as soon as you start doing that, the uncertainty grows and grows, right? And so we admit that our data are from like these really good conditions, right? Because that's when we study them. We study them when they're feeding on the feeding grounds with really good conditions. I mean, we don't tend to tag whales when they're sleeping or migrating or whatever. So we really get them when they're, at these feeding buffets. And I mean, like, I don't know, because again, I haven't been in this, working with whales for that long, but I mean, if you look at some of this tag data, when they're feeding, that is, I mean, they can feed for sometimes days without stopping. Like usually they stop at night, but there are at least a couple multi-week tags that we have. And when I say we, I mean like this broader group of many researchers that we were able to, work with their data. This is primarily James Falbush and John Kalambakidis at Cascadia Research Collective. They put out these really amazing multi-week or multi-day high-resolution tags. And there are several instances for blue and fin whales that they have in their data where these whales feed for 1, 2, 3 days without stopping. I mean, they stop to breathe, of course, but like,
Yeah.
they don't like really take a break. I mean, they often do at night, but if the conditions are good at night, they'll just keep going for like 24, 36
They're machines
hours.
when it comes to eating.
I mean, it's opportunity, right? Like when the conditions are right, the food's there, and you're in your feeding season, like you have to gorge yourself. I feel like the fact, and that's just the way they do it, right? It's because you don't know when your next meal is, right? They're opportunistic.
Exactly. I mean,
sometimes they travel, like the freaking blue whales feed from the tip of Baja to the Gulf of Alaska. It's like, and you find a hot spot, and then it's like, all right, well, it's time. This is what I've been waiting for, right?
I'm stopping.
I ain't stopping. This is it.
But still, when you're looking at that top end and you're getting to like, double digits of tons of food consumed in a day, I would still be like, is this math right? Like, is this model right?
We did a lot of that. I mean, we did a lot of that, right? I mean, and I think, again, talking about like double digits of tons, I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to translating acoustic measurements into biomass measurements.
Mm-hmm.
and I think we get mesmerized by, and I think understandably so, get mesmerized by the total weight of the food, right? But of course, if the whales can process it, the weight isn't what they're after. They're after the energy. They're after the calories, the nutrients, and that type of thing, right? So I think one of the things that's also interesting is not just how much they eat, but like the fact that if you look at the energy density, and we're trying to do more refined studies on these types of exact questions, but for a humpback whale, for example, that can and do eat fish and krill, and they can switch in Monterey Bay. What we found, and again, we're trying to do more work to get more precise, estimates of this, but they might eat, 3, 4, 5 tons of krill. This is a humpback whale, or 1 or 2 tons of fish, or something along those lines, right? But energy-wise, that's about the same, right? So that to me was also kind of amazing, right? Is that they're able to kind of, obviously, probably not consciously, but they're able to kind of coalesce on, okay, this is good, this is what I need, even if the actual mass of the food is completely different, right?
How did they just energy budget and decide which prey type, if both are available? How do they figure out, oh well, this school of fish is better than the density of this krill, or how do they decide what they're eating for the day?
That's so amazing when we have those days here offshore where it's like 12 blue whales and 25 humpbacks all within, a mile of each other. And are the humpbacks just diving down and getting anchovies, or are they switching? Because they're, that both is going on right there. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are certain times, I don't have to tell any of you, obviously, that Monterey Bay is a really special place, right? I mean, but if you think about just the biomass of these prey species that need to be around to support that level of top predator biomass that's in, like you said, a couple dozen humpbacks and maybe a dozen blue whales, is an exceptional amount of krill and fish. And so another part about this paper is, for Eastern North Pacific blue whales, it seems within the realm of possibility, and it becomes almost a question more of digestive physiology than it does about feeding rate and amount to put it in their bodies, which is to say that it seems like eating 10 to 20 tons a day is quite plausible. I think then the next level question, which is wild, because if you looked on, if you asked the internet, how much food does a blue whale eat a day, you'd get 4, 5, 6 tons, something like that. And I think if you take that and kind of like average it out across every day of the feeding season, that might be what you get. But in reality, what it turns out it's probably more is like 0, 0, 15, 0, 20, 0, like 20, 20, 20, 0, 0, 2, 2, like something like that, right? So because man, when they are feeding, and that it's not, they don't take a break for siesta, they don't take a break for anything if the food is there. Anyway, so it's but as I mentioned earlier, these are, we think, kind of more the upper bound estimates because of these biases and when we're collecting this data. We are collecting them when they are at their buffets, right? We don't have as good a data to kind of get at seasonal or annual estimates. We provide some, but we try to be cautious in our wording of, there's a lot of uncertainty here, which I think is exciting as a scientist, right? Because, then you can say, okay, let's do a study to try to reduce this uncertainty or that uncertainty moving forward.
Do you think you have a guess or an estimate of how many gallons of water a blue whale or humpback whale could take in their mouth at one time?
Oh yeah. I used to have this off the top of my head, but for some reason, okay. So I have it in meters cubed, but the issue is like, what is a meter cubed, right? So a humpback whale, we're talking about like 100 meters cubed, roughly. Now, what is a meter cubed? To me, a meter cube doesn't sound that big. Does it sound big to you? A meter cube doesn't sound that big to me.
It sounds big. Like I can't hold
3
that.
feet.
There's like 3 feet like that. I mean, it's like, okay, like 1 meter, right?
100 of those. It's bigger
but a meter cubed is 1,000 liters. And that's the way that, I mean, like, because you can start to think about like liters, right? So a meter cubed is 1,000 liters. So 100 meters cubed, I mean, what is that?
No way. There's no way. This
a million.
26,000 gallons.
Yeah, I mean that right. So it's like 100
not
meters cubed, 100 cubic meters for a blue whale. Now, and the weight of a car.
There's no way that they can take 26,000 gallons. What is
And-
a swimming pool?
And right, so
100,000 gallon or 100,000
I think it's
liters.
something like 1/5 of an Olympic swimming pool or something like that. I mean, this is all stuff that we can look up and verify. But I mean, blue whales are huge, right? Say the thing that everyone knows, right? But we can repeat it over and over again.
Yeah.
It doesn't get any less amazing what they can do. But what we know is that they double if they take a full gulp, which we think they do most of the time. They double their body volume. They double their, if you can include the water as part of their weight, they'll double their weight, you know, and with a blue whale with a full mouth of food and prey, that whole animal could be something like 200 tons or more.
That's
which,
amazing.
You know,
Slater's losing it.
Don't get how it's like, no matter how many times you show people a blue whale or any whale, they just don't understand how big they are. And like, even if they're rubbing on your boat, it's still, you're only seeing the top half of the whale. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That 8 to 10% of the whale. And it's
yeah. And so, I mean, and I think the other thing that I think is a nice thing to remind people is to be respectful of these animals, right? I mean, this is a really, really spectacular thing that we get to see here locally off the coast of California, Monterey Bay specifically, but reminding folks that, you know, there's reasons why we need to give these whales their distance and treat them with respect. And the reason that I go back to is another one of Jeremy's papers, which he led, was published in 2019, showing the heart rate of a blue whale while it was feeding. Maybe you saw that one. If not, I can definitely share it with you. I believe it's open access, so anyone can read it. But what happens when a blue whale is feeding physiologically is they go into extreme bradycardia when they dive. So when any air-breathing mammal, and I think this is probably true for birds too, so I want to say almost any air-breathing animal, but definitely any air-breathing mammal, the dive response is to lower your heart rate, right? To conserve oxygen. That's primarily why you're doing that. Blue whales do that too, and their heart rate can go down to as low as 2 beats a minute, which is the lowest heart rate ever recorded. But more typically when they're diving and feeding, it's in the range of like 4 to 8 beats a minute, something like that. But then when they come up to the surface, they're up at like 35 to 40 beats a minute, which for people is really slow. But for an animal the size of an airplane, that is incredibly fast. That would be like the equivalent of our heart rate beating at 200 beats a minute. So they're essentially at their physiological maximum in both low heart rate and high heart rate when they're feeding. So they're at this like incredibly challenging, energetic knife edge. And so I think the point of this, especially for Slater, I know, who does his some of his whale tours, right? And maybe Adam or Kayla are involved in those. I don't.
All of us do, yeah.
We all do whale watching.
We're all captains, yeah.
So I think one thing to share with your folks is that it might seem like these whales, when the people see them, it's like, oh, look at it, it's kind of lazing about. It's, you know, it's breathing. But the way I explain it to people is these animals are eating a buffet while running a marathon. And then they do that they run 3 marathons in a row and eat 3 buffets in a row, right? Like that's
24 hours. Yeah.
That's their day, right? I mean, now sometimes we saw a couple of whales off Hopkins the other day that were just hanging. It was a mom and calf, and they were like literally just floating. They weren't eating, they were hanging out. You know, but a lot of times in Monterey, when we see these whales, they are undergoing extreme exertion. And so how would you like it if you just ran a marathon and you just sprinted essentially until you were out of breath, and then when that happened, 5 cars pulled around you and had cameras in your face, right? Like, it's not really a pleasant experience. So that you know, there's a reason why we need to respect these animals and give them their space.
Tired because they're working so hard.
Totally, absolutely. And if we want to see more blue whales moving forward, we need to let them do that so they can create baby blue whales.
More blue whales. Yeah.
So
then I guess it just makes the shipping lane factor just so much more stressful. Like, if you could explain that to management, like, this animal is literally pushing the biological extremes of what it can do, and now we're asking it to do it in high-speed traffic.
Right. Do it while like crossing a highway.
Yeah.
And you know, we don't fully understand why whales get hit by ships so often, but I think one of the reasons why, and this is not just me thinking this, but I think one of the reasons why is because they're exhausted, right? I mean, like when they're coming up to breathe, which is when they get hit, if they're feeding anyway, they're exhausted, right? They might not have the energy to kind of get out of the way. But I think with that conservation issue, as with others involving whales, we know the solution. The question is, can we actually implement it? And the solution is slow down ships, and that works really effectively. But we have to have the I want to say political public will to do so. But we know that it works.
Well, it's like in Santa Barbara, they just made the slowdown mandatory, but even then, we still get boats, vessels, ships that are going 22 knots through the channel because it's financially better for them to keep that speed than to get the fine for the mandatory slowdown. It's like, it's like, you really want that Amazon package to be there the next day? It's like that's what it kind of costs sometimes.
Yeah, and so
expedited shipping, expedited world commerce, like it's just the way our world goes, I guess.
You're not wrong. I think what I would love to see moving forward is more options given to the consumer, right? Because occasionally I don't want to act holier than thou. Occasionally, like, no, I need that thing tomorrow. Like,
for sure.
But 95% of the time, if it's like, you can wait 4, 5, 10 days for this, but we'll slow down ships to save whales or something. You could add a million different things here.
They could put that as imagine they put
as
that
an
as an option,
yeah.
though. Like you save $5, it comes 3 days late or something like that. You know what I mean? At checkout, if they started putting those words, people are like, oh, I just saved a whale. You know what I mean? Like
totally. That's what I'm saying. I hope
cool,
to see more options like this moving forward, not just for whales, but for like sustainable fisheries or carbon emissions for whatever it is you're doing. I think people are hungry for these types of sustainable options, and I hope to see more of them moving forward.
Dang, I never thought about that. That'd be really cool at a checkout. If I ever sell a product, I'm going to put that at checkout. Save a whale, get it in a couple of years.
I mean, I think the ultimate issue, as Adam mentioned, is the convoluted nature of these supply chains, right? It's like you might say that, but then you have to talk. Then how do you coordinate that with all the shipping and yada yada? I think, and this gets to be way beyond my expertise, but that's anyway.
It's crazy. So if this is my big thing, because I want to see it. I just want to see it with my eyeballs. If a blue whale can eat 20 tons of krill in a day, why the heck haven't I seen one lunge feed at the surface?
Well, place, Adam.
No, it's like even in Monterey. Like, when was the last time? When was the last time I saw one lunge feeding at the surface consistently? Like 2016?
No, last fall I was out with Bob Talbot and they had a blue whale lunge feed. I just wasn't in that mile. I was
maybe once, but I get it. It's krill. We're missing it all the time. Like sensitivity to light and everything, and they typically feed lower. But it's like
I was just gonna say, I mean, you're friends with Slater, right? I mean, so he has some of
the only footage, like, really, that I've ever seen.
Except from Australia and stuff, but yeah.
I mean, so, and I've seen it once. I have some pictures and some video of it.
Dang it! I'm the only one that hasn't seen it in this group. Dang.
It is one of like my top probably 5 wildlife experiences ever to see that.
That's what I'm saying.
It is. Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, but it's very hard to predict because what they need, and this is some more of Jeremy's cool work has shown this, but what they need are these dense patches, and if the patches aren't dense enough, then they actually lose energy feeding, right? So like, and this is also something that I think would blow people's minds is like, imagine if you ate something, but just the energy expended to bite the thing
wasn't worth it.
Right. Yeah.
Like celery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, calorically, it'd be like, if you just like ate ice or something or ate celery.
I wish I had that discipline.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? That's not going to be enough. Or that's
except if you're a whale, you don't want that discipline.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to eat the thing that's going to help you gain the most weight.
Rules.
So the issue is that when krill is at the surface, usually it's not dense enough. Usually it's more spread out than when it is at depth. That's really the issue, right? And so you need to have this perfect sort of confluence of, oceanographic and ecological events where you have a dense surface patch of krill, which is just not that common. The whales don't care where
Where it's at,
prey
yeah.
Where it
staying.
is.
They don't
Yeah,
care.
yeah.
They'll feed at 0 meters, and they'll feed at, they can't really feed much deeper than 300-400 meters, but anywhere in there, or maybe they can, but they just don't, because the krill never go deeper than that. But in any case, they don't care where it is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they'll just eat it wherever it is. And another one of the cool things that Jeremy's, I think, work has shown is that the depth of the prey doesn't really impact the energetics of the feeding at all, or is super marginal, really.
That
marginal.
was going to be my follow-up question. Is like, is the
really
drag
marginal.
different, or?
No, really.
Pressure,
It seems like it's pretty marginal. Like if prey, like in Monterey, it's common for the krill layer to be like 100, 150 meters, something like that. It can be deeper, it can be shallower, but like the point is, if you're a 20, 30 meter animal, that's like traveling 3 body lengths. It'd be like you traveling like 15 feet versus 2 feet, right? Like what's the difference?
Well, and
nothing really.
Yeah.
Their buoyancy, like they become negatively buoyant anyway, so it's like not that hard to dive.
I mean, you need to power your swim one way or the other, and then you can float the other way. So it doesn't, But again, the point here being that if you're a 70, 80 foot animal, who cares if you're going 400 feet deep, right? Like,
yeah.
Right. So I always thought they fed, around like 300 feet to like 600 feet, but you're saying they can feed at like 1200 feet too.
Well, if the prey's down there, I think we have seen, usually in Monterey, no, because usually in Monterey, the prey layer is most typically, we see it between 50 and 150 meters.
Yeah.
It can be deeper, it can be shallower, but like, around 100-ish meters, plus or minus 50 meters is typically where that krill layer is in Monterey. But on work that I have not participated in personally, but some of our other lab mates have, like Dave Cade, who I know you had on your show, in the Azores, for example, in the North Atlantic, where apparently the water is, it's in the middle of the gyre, so it's pretty oligotrophic, pretty clear water. They'll feed down to 400 or 500 meters, blue and fin, because that's just where the food is, right?
Yeah.
And the difference between 100 meters and 400 meters is like, nothing for them.
Yeah.
So
that's why it's funny, like humpbacks, and when they're feeding in on the beach here in 60 feet of water, and they're 40 feet, or between 30 and 45 feet, and like they just hit their head every time they go down and scoop up.
Yeah, I mean, and you may know this, but that's not even the craziest. I mean, there are gray whales up in Washington State that are feeding in like 10, 15 feet of water.
Yeah.
But they're pulling prey off the seafloor, whereas like a humpback's trying to size up a mid water column thing with like no water to work with.
Yeah. So I mean, it's pretty amazing what they're able to do, and Monterey, you get to see a lot of that stuff. But I mean, the gray whales are incredibly flexible in what they can do. The humpback whales are incredibly flexible in what they can do. You should have Hannah Clayton on your show. She's a new PhD student in our lab, and she does a lot of work on the feeding gray whales up in Washington State. And she's like, tells me that sometimes the water they're in is so shallow, like they can't actually be like fully submerged, the gray whales.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah, it's pretty funny to watch them.
Yeah, like their tails are sticking out and stuff.
Yeah, it's like you'll see like the back half, and like you'll see the mud.
But I mean, it's this flexibility that gray whales and humpback whales have in terms of how they feed, what they eat, what they can do, that I think has enabled them to be really successful in the Anthropocene, in human modified oceans, right? Whereas if you're a right whale, if you're a blue whale, these animals that can only really eat one thing, eat in one way, have to have these very constrained life histories.
Specialist species.
Yeah. Specialists in general don't do nearly as well as generalists in the modern world. And we see that across the animal kingdom for the most part, right? I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but in general, we see that across the animal kingdom. And I think the same is true for whales. Humpback whales and gray whales are doing great right now, relatively speaking. Whereas things like right whales and blue whales are not doing so great, right? So, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. What I'm hearing is I'm not going to see a blue whale lunch feeding my entire life.
No, you just gotta keep.
Well, I
at
mean,
it.
you just have to get out there a lot. It seems like
It's-
Slater has the magic. Magic. I don't even
Caitlin
know.
was there. Caitlin, were you there with me? No. You were
Yes,
there. Yeah.
yes.
She
I
on
was
the
Yeah,
boat.
she
gonna
was there.
tell.
But I've
I
seen
was
it.
gonna-
That's what I'm
multiple times.
saying. Like that was 2016. Like that was
Well,
forever ago.
I've seen it since and before.
Virgo.
Well, it's also funny too because some of my favorite pictures and videos of blue whales surface lunge feeding are Slater's, and I got in touch with him when our paper was accepted because I was just like, oh man, they
Oh,
might
yeah, I
want
remember talking to you on
they might
Instagram.
want to cover for this. And he was basically like, I don't have any. I was like, I've seen your pictures of this. And,
No.
Oh, Slater.
Oh, I don't have any photos though.
Yeah,
Okay,
no
yeah.
Yeah,
stills,
I have
just
video,
the video.
but you could take it from the video.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I only have video of it. I don't have any photos.
Well, too
No,
late
no,
now.
I'm mostly just giving you shit. I was,
No.
but you were the first, but I think about this and I remember thinking like, they were like, are you interested in submitting a cover photo? I was like, oh, hell yeah. And
Oh, I did reach. I remember that. Then you ended up submitting something else, right?
yeah, John Durbin gave us a really
Yeah.
well photo for
I
it. And
remember that.
we got it.
Yeah.
Which was awesome.
That's cool.
But hey, it's all right. Next
Have you
time
seen it?
when you show Adam the lunch feeding,
Maybe he'll give it to you.
Gotta get
He's
pictures.
a lot
of it.
nicer than I am. No, have you seen a
Yeah,
blue
Slater
whale
will
from
sell it to you.
Hopkins?
What's that?
Have you seen a blue whale from the lab over there?
Yeah, only twice, but twice in like 4 years. But yes, and it's one of those things where when it happens, if someone sees it, like everyone gets
yeah,
notified and
everybody
everyone
knows.
goes like running out.
Mhm.
Um,
I used to call someone who was an assistant in a different lab when I worked on the wharf. I'd call Cheryl and I'd be like, "Hey, go over to the Goldbogen Lab and tell them there's a blue whale outside."
yeah. No, it's I mean, it's just a really special place to work. Obviously, I'm really lucky, and actually, one of the 2 blue whales that I've seen from Hopkins was just like a month ago or 2 months ago, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, pretty recently.
Yeah.
Matt,
One time
he's-
there was a surface feeding one, and
Yeah.
I called everyone I could think of at the lab and was like, "Get them outside
Gotta see this.
now!"
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's pretty much. It was a little further towards the point, but that's where one fed last fall when I was out. I wasn't there, but I was on the water when they called it out. But yeah, he's gonna end up seeing one, Adam, before you do from the lab.
It's just crazy to me. Like I spent 6 months with blue whales in Santa Barbara in 2020, and I didn't see a single behavior from them. And I was like, I want to see you do something. Come on.
Oh, you saw them breathe and flew.
Yeah, I know. But I wanted to see that like perfect lunge. I want to see that. Like you said, Matthew, like that's the craziest thing that I can think of in terms of like wildlife biological movements. Like nothing gets crazier than a blue whale opening its jaw. Like that's
And I think Jeremy described it. I mean, you gotta have him on his show so I can stop quoting him and he can just talk himself and he can have quotes. But,
He's gonna
think
say
it's
you already did the show for him.
yes, yeah. But I think he's described it as like the most biomechanically expensive or impressive. I'm messing this up, but like
just crazy.
basically what you're saying, Adam. Yeah.
It's just
Which
crazy.
is
to me.
amazing because they're also one of the most efficient animals on the planet. Like when you look at them just swimming, like their swimming mechanics, like they're one of the most efficient animals on Earth.
Yeah, I mean they're evolutionarily tuned to do this. The thing that they're very kind of limited in their behavioral scope. They feed on one thing in one way only. They basically have to migrate along this path, right? So they're very they're very honed to do this one thing, but the one thing they do, which is migrate and feed, they do really
They're really good at it. Yeah.
Yeah. They're basically
Well, I'm glad-
they're like giant mouths with a motor,
Yeah.
basically.
I'm glad that you answered the
too.
gallons question for Slater because the day that he flew the drone and that whale was feeding, he's like got the remote in his hand and it's just like this light bulb goes on. He looks at me, he's like, "Can you park a car inside this thing's mouth?" And I was
Well-
like, "Yeah, dude."
No, I knew that you could fit like a smart car, it's always like in their hearts as big as a boat, like that kind of thing. But it's like when you see it from the drone and like especially the one angle I have where it's coming like kind of head on with the drone, I'm like, you could just drive cars into this thing's mouth and like maybe park 2.
Yeah, I mean, so like what happens when they feed it's this really unbelievable thing, but like the jaws go like this, it creates this huge basket.
Yeah.
And one of the more special things I've gotten to do is work in some of the Smithsonian collections. They have what they call their whale warehouse, which is a giant, essentially it's an airplane hangar. And it's offsite. It's not at the Smithsonian, it's offsite. And they have the largest blue whale bones anywhere, which are their jaw bones. So the largest bones to have ever evolved in any animal of all time are a blue whale's jaw bones. And I have a picture of me sitting on them. I think it's like a 95-foot Antarctic blue whale, female, whatever. I can send you that. But it's just incredible to see this and to be able to like really stand at one end and be like, imagine carrying this, like they probably weigh, a couple tons each or something.
Yeah.
Imagine like carrying it on your face. What's that?
Yeah.
And you're on the jawbone.
Yeah. I can send you a picture.
Yeah, let's use that photo for the social media.
Awesome. I have that. Yeah, I could totally send you that one if you remind me. Yep, I have that one, and it's
cool.
It's extraordinary.
We'll use them both.
Thinking back to the prey consumption, so some days, they eat an incredible amount of food, and it really has to do with the conditions are perfect for that in that place.
Yeah.
And you can average it across the season if you want. But when you think about like actual effective fisheries management, like what do we do with this information? You know what I mean? Like, how do you help set quotas and protect those places where they're finding those really big days? It just seems like so hard to figure out.
It has to be fluid, I don't know.
Yeah. So what you mentioned, Adam, is a thing that some of my colleagues work on called dynamic ocean management, which is this idea that, these, how we catch stuff, where we catch stuff, when we catch stuff has to be really responsive to what the environment's doing, because you're not talking about, logging a forest or something like that. You're talking about a really dynamic ocean. So I think a lot of this stuff has been decently well worked out off our coast, right? So right now, harvesting krill commercially is not allowed off the coast of the United States, which I just recently learned. And the reason is because we know it's really important for the whole ecosystem, right? But in Antarctica, we do harvest krill, which I'm concerned about, to be frank. And we know now that we're harvesting krill within and amongst and around whales. And so I think we really need to be smart about, if we're doing that at all, we need to be really smart about how we're doing that, and just some kind of fairly simple, at least in theory, ways to kind of mitigate those potential harms. And again, like you said, basically, we don't need krill to survive. These blue whales, particularly in Antarctica that are recovering, really do. That's the only thing they eat. And so I think we should fish around the margins, if at all, for Antarctic krill, and avoid these super dense patches that we know everything happens to seals, to whales especially, rely on. But without there being, regulations in place, why would a fishery, and I don't even blame them, frankly, why? Because if there's no regulation and no rules, why would an individual commercial fishing boat avoid the best patch unless they are not allowed to do it, right? And so they're not.
My argument with that would be like educating the fishery on these whales are providing you this krill. Like, it's an endless loop. Like the whale,
but at the end of the day,
the whale poop is so important. Everything is, and to a certain extent,
it all comes down to your profit margin, though. At the end of the day, it does. So if you're gonna set your net more times to fish on the margin, it's gonna cost you more money for the same amount of haul as if you set the net half as many times in the denser patch. So it's like, for them, it's a numbers thing.
Yeah.
Which also for the whales, it's a numbers thing. It's just not money.
And Adam, I think this is part of a deeper philosophical debate that, we can have another time over beers or something.
Ooh, that sounds great.
But I think an ultimate concern for humanity, and this is like, now we're getting into the big picture, right? Which is economies and people work at a much shorter time scale. So even if you say to the fishery, right, and actually the krill fishery, at least allegedly, there's like this whole ecologically responsible krill fishery that, I'm not clear how much of it is for show and how much of it they actually care about it, but like they
Yeah.
claim to want to be ecologically responsible, right?
Aware.
That-
Yeah.
That's all I'll say, right? But ultimately, what it comes down to is they're operating as individuals and as a unit on this time scale that is much quicker than whale poop would operate to fertilize phytoplankton
For
to grow
sure.
krill.
For
I mean,
sure.
that's a cycle that takes years or decades, right?
Yeah.
You need your krill to make your money, to feed your family, whatever,
Yeah.
like this year, this week, this month. So
Yeah.
dealing with those differences in time
For sure.
scales, in terms of, because yeah, I mean, if we screw the planet, whether it be biodiversity or climate, whatever it is,
we live here.
We're all
that's
of them
like,
at
oh,
once.
that's like a later problem. We'll worry about that.
Yeah.
We'll worry about that when like everything is collapsing
Yeah.
because we
course.
need our X, Y, and Z right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a big problem.
For sure. I think the last thing I just wanted to talk about briefly was, I mean, you're very passionate about science communication. You've done a great job of communicating your science through our episode. I don't know if you wanted to share any other thoughts about SciComm work that you've done over your career. I know you gave a TED talk while you were at UC Davis about marine pollution and all that good stuff. So I was just wanted
Yeah,
to give you an
I
opportunity.
I'm really passionate about this. I mean, because I like it. But more than that, I think it's like really necessary at this point in time.
Yeah, for sure.
To be doing this. And I think, scientists who by and large are funded by, taxes, basically, ultimately,
Mhm.
have a real responsibility to start doing this. We can't, scientists have what I call the privilege of knowledge. And I think it should become more and more of a required responsibility to translate that knowledge, because if you don't translate that knowledge, then how does anyone ever know what's going on to then form an opinion about something, to then
What's the
vote about
point?
something,
Yeah.
right? And then scientists are like, oh, well, we're not changing this or that. It's like, well, how do you think things change, and actually,
There's no point.
Yeah.
right. And so what I was just doing was I was just bringing up a really, I think, well-worded editorial from the editor-in-chief of Science. And I just quoted this on my Twitter. And so this is a quote from that article that he wrote. And it says, quote, "Science must realize that progress is more than just filling journals with knowledge and hoping for the best. We must value and partner with communicators and policymakers who can show that scientific advancement demands that the nation operate as a work in progress." And this is, this was, end quote. And this was, resultant to all the decisions that have happened recently at the federal level relating to, everything from reproductive rights to EPA regulations and everything, which is that, part of this burden of why all this is happening falls on us scientists, I think, for not really effectively, not just saying, hey, here's what we found, but even saying, like, here's what we found, here's what we mean, and here's what we need to do about that thing. And I think the reason is because up until very recently, and perhaps still to this day, any form of advocacy is frowned upon in academia, right? Because you need to be completely objective, you need to be totally detached from your findings, right? And that's ideal, but we're not robots, right? I mean, find me anyone, is particularly working on in an environmental field, but probably anyone in any form of science, I would imagine, who is objective and dispassionate about what they want to find, what they hope to see, what they hope for it to mean, and so on. I just don't think that's realistic. I mean, even if it's ideal to create the most unbiased science that could possibly exist, I mean, we're people with emotions and feelings. And so the idea that we shouldn't advocate for what we care about, I think is going away for the most part. And I think that's a good thing, because I think we really need people who have the privilege of knowledge, like scientists have, to also advocate in ways in which they feel comfortable and in ways in which the science can support and all that type of thing. I'm not saying that we should go out and say things that are fringe and we have no evidence for and so on, that really go against what it's all about to be a scientist, actually. But to just say, oh, we can't have an opinion about this, and we can't say, a government or a people or an individual should do this, that, or the other, to promote sustainability, conservation, and so on. I think that's silly. And so I hope to see that become less and less emphasized, and we can really speak out in the things that we know about and that we're passionate about.
I think also, like, at the end of the day, a lot of what, especially for wildlife science, a lot of what you learn ends up going into the rule making for human behavior, right? Like, you're learning things and then going, okay, we need to change the conservation strategy for this. So that means you're making rules about people after what you've learned, what science you've done. So, like, people need an explanation as to why the rules are the way they are. And I also think people don't realize how much science they pay for. You know, like, they don't realize that that's what their tax dollars go to, and like, they deserve an explanation of what their money went towards.
And also that everything they enjoy is a result, ultimately, when it goes back to it, of some sort of scientific advancement, right? Like, if you're enjoying absolutely anything and everything, whether it's the food that you're eating or the microphone you're speaking into or the cell phone that whatever it is, I mean, there's a lot of basic and applied science that got us those products or those things that we're enjoying. And so, but we can't expect people to understand all this stuff. I'm a scientist and I don't understand a lot of science, even within my field, right? And I need it to be translated and I need to be told why I should care about this or that or the other. So how are we supposed to tell people who don't do any form of science for a living, right? Or expect them to know any of this? I mean, so that's why I'm really passionate about communicating this stuff. It's like the little piece I think that I can do that ironically might have a bigger impact than any actual science that I might do. Because if you get that well articulated point into the right hands, it could have way more of an impact in the real world than any paper you publish or whatever thing you discover.
Definitely.
That's why we're here, right, whale nerds?
And that's why ultimately, when you asked me to be on this show, I'm like, yeah, sure, absolutely. If I can get this message out to even 2 new people, that would be really great. So
hopefully more than 2.
Hopefully more than
sure.
2.
There's 2 right here in this lobby that get it now.
Well, thank you so much for being on our podcast. This is awesome. We really enjoyed it. So I'm glad you were able to make the time and come on the show with us.
Yeah, it was cool. I really appreciated it. And, hopefully we can meet in person sometime and talk more about this stuff and other stuff. And, obviously we're still doing a lot of work on these topics and others. And, love to update you on what we're finding as we find it out.
Yeah, it sounds great. Also, thank
do
you
it
to
over
everyone.
a couple beers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And we'll have him back on the podcast in the future.
Sure. Yeah.
Also, just thank you to everyone that listens to the podcast. We really appreciate all of you for supporting our work and taking the time to listen to us talk about things that we're very passionate about. And I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, guys.